Welcome. This is Office Hours. We're on episode number 17 today. It is episode 17 of Office Hours. And today, we have a very special episode for you. Today, I'm going to answer some of your most burning questions. These kinds of questions are really, in my wheelhouse, if you know what I mean. You don't have to look very far for an expert on this game. I'm about to crane down some knowledge on you. You like that? Bam! That's for you. So, I get all these questions about various games, right? Like, people submit questions about their campaign, but tend to ask questions about generic stuff, right? Occasionally we'll get a specific question, but mostly it's like, how do I manage an aspect of GMing that is fundamentally kind of true no matter what game you're playing? And that's cool, right? It's nice to be able to give advice that applies to everybody. But a lot of those can be solved with, as we've discussed before, way back in like episode 1, get to know your group, understand the rules of the game, know how those two things fit together, talk to people like they're people, right? Like we do different variations on that stuff, plus like some GM confidence boosters, and we talk about all that. But sometimes I get specific questions about particular systems, and none more than the burning wheel. Right? And I think this is a combination of the fact that y'all know how much I love the burning wheel and how much I talk about it, so I have thoughts and opinions on how to run it, but also because I think that it's perceived as this kind of hard to GM game, that it's kind of this like master class that you can't really get into without some kind of special knowledge. It's the AD&D in a lot of people's minds of our era. And I don't know that that's particularly true. Because I think that in a lot of ways, GMing Burning Wheel, mechanisms aside, like learning the mechanisms and mastering those, that's definitely a thing. But that stuff aside, like if you know how to play the game, it's actually kind of a reactive game. It's kind of passive as the GM. Really, what you do is you poke and you prod and you shove, but you don't have to do, like in D&D, as much creating of the universe. The Burning Wheel puts so much more onus on the players than it does on the GM. But that said, like with all aspects of gameplay, there are nuances to the Great Wheel that come with experience and with play, and so I can share some of that experience with you. And what I'm going to try to do today is answer these questions as much as I'm able to using just my own experience with the game. This is what I do, I guess, for like every question, but I wanted to call out that there's actually a ton of really good advice available on the Burning Wheel forums. I learned a lot of my tricks from there. Burning Wheel headquarters in general, like they have played a fucking ton of Burning Wheel, right? And a lot of the answers to these questions I'm going to talk about today, you can find them in, if you're lucky enough to score a copy, the Adventure Burner, or depending on when you're watching this, the Burning Wheel Codex. Right? At the time of my doing this live, it's not available to the general populace yet. It's sending out to Kickstarter backers. But by the time you hear this, if you want more information, the codex might be available to you. So I've referred to it in a couple of places. But what I want to do is talk about my specific advice for these situations based on what I've done in my game. So you're gonna hear some references to my Roll20 Presents Burning Wheel game, both series. I'm going to talk a little bit about my history with the wheel in general, but if you want better advice than mine, or certainly deeper advice, get your hands on the Codex, get your hands on the Adventure Burner, whichever is available to you, and listen to the advice that it gives. But for now, let's see if old Professor Coble can lend a hand and be a good spokesperson for the Burning Wheel. See, I got you. I got one more in there.
Hey Adam, love your Roll20 Burning Wheel shows. It's got me playing some Burning Wheel as well. Now, in my most recent game, we found that the characters weren't really tied to the situation properly. Their beliefs didn't sort of tie in well to the situation. The situation itself was sort of vague, so we sort of decided to start over after a few sessions, and we got a feel of the game. It's got me thinking about your game. You started out with a pretty solid, urgent situation. The players had to get to the town, dispose the Duke, and then keep the town safe over winter. And that focused the game. We saw, like most scenes we saw were players driving towards the goal of disposing of the Duke, keeping the town safe, etc., etc. They were always driving towards a goal. But ever since the players got back to Graustadt, I felt that the situation has been much more vague. It isn't so much a criticism as an observation. I love the weird places you've gone because of that. How do you balance the here's what the game is about urgency with the let's just explore the setting for a while impulse? How tight or urgent does the situation need to be? Does it change with time? Are there sort of like bigger situations and smaller situations, sort of like Russian stacking dolls?
Yugi, I think you win for longest submitted question, but it was a good one. So, situation, right? Situation. It's the first real responsibility of a Burning Wheel GM to their group to set up the situation. And Luke defines the situation as how do you put it? The seed. It's the seed of a problem that will drive the characters into conflict. Because in Burning Wheel, what matters is the PCs and their ability to change themselves and the world around them, right? It's not a game about like the West Marches, for example, or like both iterations of it, both Stephen and Ben's version, basic D&D, right, old school adventures. These are games that are about the world, they're about the problem, but they're not about the characters. And so what we can often do, coming from games like that into the Burning Wheel, is assume that as the GM we have to have this hyper-aggressive state of the world where we know things are going on, we've got like fronts moving, and like it's not like that. You don't run Burning Wheel like that, especially from the beginning, especially early on. So think of the situation as what you as the GM bring to the table before character creation. In a lot of ways, it's sort of your stand-in character creation. Now, there's no specific process for creating a good situation, but what it does when you can do that is create a situation that enables the characters to flourish. And I don't mean flourish in the like get better sense, but like engage their mechanisms and do things. It will give the players the ability to create characters with specific targeted beliefs and instincts, and it'll guide them in choosing their life paths. This is your main job as the GM, right? Early on, not later, but before character creation, during character creation. It's the authorial space that says, this is what I'm interested in. And like all aspects of a brand new game, you get to negotiate that stuff with your players, but in this case, it's your call to say what the situation is. You're not negotiating that situation with your players. You're not coming to the table saying, what do you guys want to play in this campaign? Though you might, if you've got more familiarity with your players. We'll talk a little bit about that at the last question. But in a lot of ways, this is just your stake in the ground that tells the players how to proceed from where they're standing, no characters yet, no real idea of the game, into the future. It's a signpost towards what you want the game to feel like. If you say, I'm interested in exploring the ramifications of a world in which a group of people destroyed an empire and were cursed for it, you're telling the players things that they need to know. You are feeding their soul. You're giving them information about what they need to make their characters, right? They're going to be thinking about curses, fallen empires, a change in social order, the new world, redistribution of wealth. They're going to start getting all of that stuff in their head. And when you're coming at building a situation, one thing I personally often have trouble with is creating a distinct sense of antagonism. I'm not really good at being like, these are the things that will oppose you. That for me tends to come later. So something that I'd advise would be, if you're less hindered by that than I am, would be to keep Luke's focus on conflict in mind. Because without conflict, Burning Wheel is meaningless, right? Try to think about who or what in your situation is creating that conflict, who has the power, who wants it, who has stability, who's protecting it, who's causing chaos, and guide your players towards creating characters that will either mesh with or bash heads with those things, those structures that you're creating. The situation you present at the start of a new campaign has to be clear and strong, because otherwise the characters won't come out with a sense of purpose, right? Which is what Burning Wheel is all about. You're fighting for what you believe in. And the protagonists need to be challenged. They need to take actions that illustrate how much they care about the things they care about and what the lengths they'll be willing to go to get there, right? So you need to be able to be the person who, think about when you try to go for food with your friends, right? And you're like, all right, guys, we gotta go for dinner. Suzanne, what do you want? And Suzanne's like, I don't know, whatever. And you're like, fine. Alex, what do you want? And Alex is like, and you're like, okay, well, I don't know what I want either. And then you all just end up getting something that nobody wants because you didn't really think about it. And in this case, what you need to do is be the GM, come to the table and be like, hamburgers, motherfucker. Hamburgers. And then the players can say, ooh, I would like a veggie burger. And then the player can be like, ooh, oh, wait, chicken burger, yeah? With bacon? Yeah, that's right. And you can riff off things. You as the player, you have to come to the table and be like, this is what I want to do. This is why I want to play Burning Wheel, right? And the thing is, at the beginning of the game, your starting situation is never going to be that detailed because you don't know anything about the world, because the world doesn't matter without the players in it. So you're talking about thematic stuff. You're talking about flavor, right? You could be like, I want a game that's inspired by 14th century France, and I want to talk about what happens when a major monarch dies and everyone gets sick. So there's a land of plague. Okay, cool. Like, let's make some characters. And someone is going to be like, oh, I want to be a doctor who's trying to save people from the plague. Someone else is going to be like, oh, I want to be the bastard son of the king, and I want to try to, like, regain the nobility. So, like, the situation is what gives people space to make characters. And if you don't give them that hard stake in the ground, then they'll never know what to make. And that can be hard, right? Burning Wheel is funny because a lot of people miss that it's so much about the characters, right? Like, and I blame tabletop RPG marketing for this, but go to Gen Con, go to Origins, walk around the hall, ask people who make role-playing games what their games are about, and count how many times they use the phrase character-driven role-playing. And then come on back and let me know, because it's going to be a fucking lot. Right? Character-driven role-playing gets thrown around a lot as just like a marketing term, like, ooh, there are characters, and your characters are important. Because PCs, like, people want their PCs to be important, right? But Burning Wheel isn't just character-driven role-playing, it's the characters are the only fucking thing that matters. It's aggressively not about the NPCs. It's aggressively not about the world. It's not about the GM's fucking special scenario. Very little to none of that actually really matters when it comes down to it, because the game is about the characters, and the situation only exists. It only exists for this one purpose, fundamentally, and that's to inform the players how to make characters and then create the opportunity for conflict. That thing is why you make your situation. And as the characters develop in the game, so too will the situation. So this is kind of going back to what we were talking about before, right? Where the question sort of came from. Burning Wheel campaigns fall into natural arcs, right? This is why seasons, the way we understand them as a television trope, fit so nicely into the game. And this isn't by accident. This isn't some bullshit. This is mechanical, right? Look at advancement. Look at trait votes. Look at resource maintenance. These things happen in arcs. Sometimes the arcs are a season. Sometimes they're episode based. Sometimes they're related to character activity. But these things happen in chunks. And they're there to bookend the action. And as you saw and pointed out in Roll20 Presents, we had a pretty different situation to attend to once we finished the Graustad arc. Because we were able to recognize the ways in which the situation has changed as we move through a larger campaign. And that's what lets you know whether the game is worth continuing or whether you've resolved the situation and you want to play something set 1,000 years in the past or set somewhere else in the world. The campaign arcs, the way these things work in Burning Wheel, are there to set up finishing points for you. Burning Wheel is actually kind of an easy game to finish. It will very clearly mechanically tell you when your situation has changed to the point where you can decide if you want to keep going. Think about your situation as a GM-focused belief. You can think about it in that way. Elements of the situation will remain the same, right? Ramifications of revolution, ancient and powerful curse, but elements of it will develop as you're exploring different aspects of that situation. The urban versus the rural, the changing world, politics, philosophy. The game will move, it'll pivot around the stake you've put in the ground, right? That's the maypole the characters are all dancing around. And if you find yourself drifting from your original situation, you want to look at the game and you want to decide whether it's still working for you in the sense that the characters are all fitting into what you want for the game, everyone's so keyed into the world and the story you're telling, the buy-in is still there. And we'll talk about buy-in again in question 3. And the thing is, if you're drifting, it's okay, right? Because if you play Dungeons and Dragons and you get to a point where you realize the game just isn't about dungeons or dragons anymore, and you just don't care what level you are, and nobody's rolling dice because you don't have any mechanisms for shit. You're just hanging out in town and selling stuff and engaging with NPCs. You're not playing D&D anymore. Your game is broken. But in Burning Wheel, if you go from freebooters on the frontier to robber barons in their castle to the new nobility of a brand new country, those are all Burning Wheel campaigns, and the game can expand and contract different mechanisms. It's got these extendable appendages that can reach out and grab onto your players and keep them engaged. It's a game about momentum, and as it moves, it changes. So what I think you were seeing in the Freiburg arc of the game, which you called, what do you say, let's just explore the setting for a bit, that impulse. What that was me taking a bit of a step back from the aggressive, like, these characters are brand new, these players are mostly new to Burning Wheel. Now I've given them a chance to learn the game. I'm going to take a step back, and we're going to let them tell me what they want. The space of the game was no longer bounded simply by the mission, but by their beliefs. And so I was able to play challenger to their intent. And you notice, like, that's what the game felt like more about. I was letting them wander around and do their thing. And that, in that way, is what I think makes Burning Wheel, and this is sort of a weird, depending on how you understand the term, but it kind of makes it a weird analogy, but I kind of think that Burning Wheel is basically one of my favorite kind of open world sandbox games, because motivation comes not from the outside, but from within, from the hub to the rim, along the spokes of the character's beliefs. Your situation is, and this is just like what Luke said, your situation is a seed, and what it grows into will depend on the beliefs, instincts, traits, and most importantly, your situation will evolve based on the roles the players make for their characters. A successful role can push through to a belief that resolves and changes a character fundamentally, which will change the situation. And a handful of dice that end up all traitors on the table can start an avalanche that brings out the big guns of the situation to bear, right? You may be able to avoid the necromancer Baronthrax for the first few sessions, but if you're out there trying to gather information about his servants and you flub a roll, well, now Baronthrax knows you're out there. And it's twisted the nature of the situation, which might have just been get rid of Baronthrax. Now it's survive his terrible plague, right? So, you know, the thing to remember here is your situation, once you've used it to water the fertile ground of the players' minds and create characters, it's a guidepost, not a straitjacket. You want to let the players' beliefs inform how you challenge them, and to use the antagonists, the setting, the various stuff you've built up around them, to act as a toolbox. The situation becomes then just something to remind you what direction you thought you were traveling in the first place. The next time you come to a signpost, next time you do that trait vote, you might find that instead of heading south, now you're going west, right? New vistas ahead. So for more on this, there's an entire subchapter in the Codex. If you want specifically, if you want Luke and company's advice, check out Situation Commentary. It's in the Burning Wheel Codex. It expands on a lot of the stuff that I was saying and gives some more kind of specific advice around that. But I didn't write that chapter, so do with that what you want. So the situation obviously is where you start, and player dynamics, character dynamics, are a huge part of feeding off of that situation and engaging in the ongoing fiction of your game. And different groups work different ways, different players have different dynamics with each other. And our second question is about a very specific kind of Burning Wheel group.
Hi Adam, I'm Zdeněk, or Narameus. Thanks to you, I want to play a Burning Wheel now. But here's the situation. Out of all my gaming group, I only managed to convince 2 players to give it a try. I'd say I'm experienced with specifics of GMing campaigns with 1 or 2 players, but only in the D&D and Pathfinder. System-specific things like calculating proper challenge rating, acknowledging which skills they have and which not, and so on. So my question is, what are the specifics of running a Burning Wheel campaign with 2 or even 1 player? I'd imagine you never had such problem, but hey, you have the Burning Master life path here. I'm just starting with the Wheel's apprentice. Help me, Adam. You're my only hope.
Well, a question with flattery like that, I can't not answer it. But, Nirmas, this is interesting because I think that you're coming up against something that is going to prove a little difficult, but hopefully I can help prepare you for it. Especially if it's your very first Burning Wheel campaign. But so, okay, for me, I've actually done this, right? I've had a couple of campaigns with both 1 PC, 2 PCs, like small groups, and right now it's not too hard for me to find players. It's more hard for me to find time, but the point being, it's doable. It's totally doable. And I will say this. So you asked specifically about mechanics, and I'll touch on some mechanical stuff, but straight up, you don't ever need to worry ever about balance in Burning Wheel, right? As long as the fiction and the mechanisms fit, right? As long as you're not like, you see a 10-year-old boy, he challenges you to an arm wrestle. I roll 46 dice. Because, I don't know, his power is through the roof. His fort is probably also through the roof. Don't bullshit like that, right? As long as those things go together, calculating OB for tests, just base it on the fiction, right? It's all tied to what's fictionally true. Don't worry about the Pathfinder or the 5e stuff getting in your brain. You don't need to give them appropriate OBs for their skill level. It's their job to find tests that they can pass or fail if they want that result. It's only your job to challenge them appropriately with what's in the fiction according to their beliefs and instincts, right? So wipe that sort of fairness stuff from your mind, and then we'll get into this question. Just clear your head. Is it gone? Got all the Pathfinder out of there for right now? Just temporarily. You can put it back in. It's cool. So here's the main thing. Here's the main thing about 2-player. I'm going to focus on 2-player Burning Wheel because I think that 3-player, 4-player, 5-player, it's all the same past that point. But with 2-player games, the main difference is it's super fucking intense. Burning Wheel is an intense game. You come out the other end of a Burning Wheel session, all of you, feeling like a little sweaty, kind of tired, maybe you need a drink or a cigarette if it was a good session. Don't smoke. But the point is that it's very hard to stay totally engaged with one other person for a full 4-hour session, right? Like, think about this. Burning Wheel with 4 or 5 players, and I'm gonna butcher an analogy that doesn't belong to me, but Burning Wheel with 4 or 5 players is like a small casual gathering, and if you need to check your phone, it's pretty sure that other people will have a conversation while you dip outside, make a phone call, and come back, right? You want to get a snack, you need some water, you gotta go pee. Everybody's going to keep moving the momentum of the conversation forward without you. But a 2-player game of Burning Wheel is like a date. You are focused on ostensibly one other person. I don't know what your dates are like. There's lots of different ways to go on dates, but a traditional date, you're very intensely focused on one person for the entire time. You are both responsible for the conversation, and if one person falters, the other either has to pick up the speed or falter with them. So it can get intense. In a 4 PC game, you got some time to take a breather, right? Like, you can rest and think and look at your character sheet and, like, not wither under the fucking eye of Sauron of the GM all the time. In a big game, you can play second fiddle, right? You can be rhythm guitar. You can be like, today I don't have the energy for a solo, but chug, 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 I'm going to be your backup. Do not worry, I have got you. But in a 2-player game, that's it. You're the only performer. You're both on stage. It's 2 separate 1-performer shows, and it can be very intense and a lot of work. But that's okay. That's okay. Because we don't play Burning Wheel because we're scared of intense games, do we? If we wanted to play something soft, we'd be playing Paranoia. No offense to Paranoia. But when we're playing a game of Burning Wheel with a big group, I'll often suggest that players write their belief thusly, right? One, about your past, right? Why are you no longer who you were on your last life path? One, about your hopes or ambitions for the future. What do you hope to gain for your character? And one for another player character. Only, if it's just you and the GM, you can use those first 2, fine, past and future, but they help you ground your character in the world, in the situation, but you're writing a belief about someone, some other character. You want to tie yourself to the people in the world, and that can be hard when it's just you and the GM. So what I often suggest to replace that is look to the NPCs that you've created, right? Otherwise you're going to be a lone wolf. If you want to play the, like, wandering badass with no friends or family, that's fine. Write your third belief about why you're such a piece of shit and no one likes you. That's cool. But you can also create a relationship, right? And write a belief about them and have them accompany you. This is an opportunity for your character to tie themselves to someone or someone's important, right? Spend some of your points on, like, a friend. Buy a friend, kids. Or buy a gang. Or hire a squire and be Lady Brienne and Podrick Payne, right? Like, get your social shit together and write a belief about an NPC. Give the GM someone that you care about and tie yourself to them. The social stuff, you'll pick it up as you go. The GM and the player should agree on a premise that feels like it's the right kind of game. If you want to play the badass loner, that's fine. But make sure you're both on board with that. And the rest of the game works out more or less the same, except for a couple of things. So there are a few places in the rules, and this is a question, just to digress slightly, this is a question that comes up constantly in people asking me about playing 2-player Dungeon World. Dungeon World, as written, does not work for 2 players. Like, flat out doesn't. You can't do it. You have to change bonds. In the same way, there are things about Burning Wheel that were not written for 2 players. So these are things like the trait vote. A 2-person vote, it's hard to do, right? MVP, embodiment awards, deeds awards, they're harder to manage without a group of people to vote on. And what you can do, if you really, really want to, like if you really want to go this direction, as the player, with the GM's consent, you can give up your agency on these things. You can just say, GM, reward me when you think I deserve it. Now, that completely challenges the aesthetic of control in Burning Wheel. That's a complete change to the way that power functions in that game. But it's okay if you want to do it that way. More often than not, what it does is it puts impetus on both players to act as impartial judges of the fiction. You have to get some distance from your own performance. It goes from being a trait vote to being a trait discussion, right? And it requires a lot more diplomatic engagement than just a vote, right? So when someone else in the group, say you're playing in a bigger group, someone else in the group earns MVP and you think you deserve it, you can at least look at their performance and be like, yeah, no, they did great, right? Suzanne was awesome. She deserves MVP. But when it's just you and the GM and you're like, oh man, MVP, right? Like, I mean, only valuable player. I got and the GM says, no, you gotta work harder for that shit. That can be hard to hear. So, talk it out. Be willing to discuss the character as a thing that's not you And as a GM, be willing to like hear why the player thinks that they deserve certain rewards. Speak up for yourself when you think they do or don't, and be willing to engage in that process. Because playing Burning Wheel with a single PC and a GM can be crazy intense. It can be super focused, and you can really get shit done, right? You can make a character go from a 4-life path, only Blackshade skill, nobody, to like goddamn fucking Hercules in a much shorter period of time. But it requires intense stamina and fortitude that even a standard group-based Burning Wheel game at its hardest will never demand from you. Which brings me all the way back to your original question, and I think the reason you're asking it. Right? Because it was like, I've convinced a person to play Burning Wheel with me. You're going into hard mode. Be sure that that is clear with both you and your player from the get-go, right? Play shorter sessions. Don't fucking try 4 hours. Try 2. Just do 2 to start. Warm up, right? Take your time and try not to get burned out. When we all share the heat, the burning wheel doesn't burn quite so hot. But when it's just 2 people, a dark room, and some dangerous beliefs, shit can get real fast. So if you're inexperienced with the burning wheel, just be gentle with yourself, take it slow, and as I mentioned before, the Codex, God of Fire bless its pages, has some more on this particular more in this topic, under running the game, I think, is the heading. There's a couple of pages about one-player games. So, again, Codex will give you some more stuff to work with in that sense. So I wouldn't suggest doing a one-on-one Burning Wheel game from the get-go, but it is pretty cool. It can be really fun. You just have to be ready for it to be hard.
Hi Adam, Grog Monster here. I've recently decided to GM a game of Burning Wheel with a bunch of strangers from the 20. I understand that Burning Wheel is a game driven by characters and their beliefs. My problem? My players have never met each other. How can I get a bunch of people who have never met each other to create a world and narrative together? Also, it's my first time GMing Burning Wheel. Is there anything you think I should keep in mind? Thanks.
2 questions. I hear 2. So I hear a question about playing Burning Wheel with strangers. And I hear one about GMing Burning Wheel for the first time. It's okay. I think we can cover both for this particular question. So first of all, let's all just acknowledge that it's always hard to play RPGs for the first time with a group of people you don't know, especially if they don't know each other and you don't know them, and maybe they don't know the game and you just found them on the internet. You don't know whether this is going to be a group that you are going to engage with and play games with the whole rest of your adult life, or if this is just going to end up another sad and confusing story about that one time that guy wanted to play Kill Fuck Soul Shitter on RPGNet, and you're going to be posting it every time you see the worst game experience of your life thread come up. I mean, RPG groups, like any human relationship, often end up somewhere in the middle. Right? Good stuff, bad stuff, elements that work, mechanisms that are fun, elements that don't work, mechanisms people have problems with. And like all human relationships, no matter good or bad, they start with a stranger. Right? Or in this case, 3 to 5 strangers with a specific task set before them. And your task here, this task is what makes the game go. It's what makes the group live. And you as the GM are going to be looked upon as a manager of that task, whether it's part of your game or not, because that's how people see GMs for now. And you're going to have to be okay with that, because otherwise it's just like, you might as well go ahead and stop, right? If you're the one organizing the game, people are going to look to you to keep being the organizer. And that's the thing you're just going to have to be okay with, unfortunately, for now. People will pick up steam as you go, and they'll take on responsibility, but you know, it's going to be your job. So Burning Wheel, it requires, as we talked about before, one major thing. You need to come to the table with this, especially in a group that has never played before with each other or the game. Strangers or old friends, if you're Burning Wheel GM, you need a situation. Get one. You might already have it in mind, right? often we come into a game with the situation decided before we want to even play an RPG at all, right? We have themes and settings and antagonists. We've got things that we want. It's the little voice that says, when you're thinking about a kingdom of elves trapped forever in snow, right? And their High Queen Throndir, it's the thing that makes you say, hey, I want to play this in an RPG. Maybe you read a comic, watched a movie, or just had a weird fantasy thought while playing Pokemon Go. This is what's going to be your situation. These little things will start to build up. And if you don't have that in mind before you come to the table with this new Burning Wheel group, get your situation together. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to provide some advice that might not seem very Adam. You might have this urge, right? You might have this urge to come to the table like you're playing Burning Wheel just the same way you play Apocalypse World, and you might want to say, hey, what do you want the situation to be? What do you guys want to play? Don't do that. Don't do it. Don't. Like, just, it's... Okay, seriously. Like, you know me, and you know I love even distribution of narrative authority, and I like fucking throwing that shit all over the place, but the situation is yours. Yeah, you Grog Monster. That's your situation. Come to the table and say, motherfuckers, slam that situation on the table. This is what I want to play. This is what I'm interested in as a GM. And then give your players a chance to help you mold that into a thing that everybody else wants to play with. Come to the idea with a solid situation, because if you don't, it's going to be very hard, as we mentioned before, for the players to do their job, which is to make characters that fit the situation, because if there's no fucking situation, what are they going to make characters for? You would not be expected to pick their life paths for them, so don't make them choose elements of your situation. Now, what you can do, and should do, is be flexible, right? If your concept is you're all members of the last remnant, the failed army of humans who lost in a great battle against the Ice Queen Throndir, and a player suggests, but what if there are dwarves among this human army? It's probably not too much of a drift from your concept. You still get your Ice Queen, you still get the scrappy army losers. This person just wants to play a dwarf, so that probably is okay. You're probably able to, like, bend around that space and allow them to do that. Luke talks about this in the core book, where when you're like, I want an entire group, it's a world without magic. All the magic users have been hunted to extinction. Someone will always be like, yes, except for me, the mighty wizard. I am last of my kind because I am very special. Also, I'm a dark elf. Right? Someone is going to do that, and that's okay. Right? PCs are already special fucking snowflake bullshit losers, so let them be the special snowflake bullshit losers they want to be in their heart of hearts. Your job here is to stand firm on the things that you care most about and help create buy-in, right? Show your key premise, explain what you like about it, be flexible, answer and ask questions. Get everyone to say, fuck yeah, I'm gonna play that, right? Get them to buy in. And then get into character creation. Use your GM authority. It's okay. The rules say you're allowed. Once you got buy-in, the whole rest of the game is easy. Well, I mean, okay, it's not easy, but it's easier. So, you know, as a new GM to Burning Wheel, I'm just gonna, like, it's simple, right? Not necessarily the Burning Wheel, but I'm gonna just lay it out for you. I'm gonna verbatim read to you from the rule book here. Well, I typed out part of the rule book. I'm not gonna go get it, but I'm gonna read to you from the rule book, and I'm gonna just tell you what Luke told you, and I hope you remembered it when he said it, and if not, this is the biggest thing that people fuck up and forget about, and if you don't forget it, and if you don't fuck it up, it's gonna make GMing Burning Wheel for the first time so much easier, right? This is the lubricant on the great engine that's going to be your campaign. You got to get a good start. So let's all read along on page 74 at the end of the section explaining the basic rules of the game. Good old Luke Crane says to us, at this point, I strongly urge you. Now, strongly urge you is Luke being kind here. He's saying fucking do it. I strongly urge you to make a character. Get a friend or two together. Take the system you've just read for a spin. Nothing big. A small one-goal scenario would be best. Play out social and physical altercations using the versus test rules. Get some tests for advancement. Get some Arthur from the stingy GM. As questions arise about detailed resolution, make a few notes. And after the game, start reading through the chapters in Rim of the Wheel. Do it! Fucking do it! Don't be that asshole. So many nerds, and I'm this. Just, you've seen me do this. So many nerds are like, meh, telling me to slow down. I played some fucking role-playing games in my day. I used to play Rifts, motherfucker. I know how to make a bad game work. You can't scare me. It's not worth it. Burning Wheel will destroy you. Don't try to do range and cover on your first day. You fucking crazy person. Just play. Play with the rules to that point and just expand on that shit. Then ease yourself in to fight. Ease yourself into Duel of Wits. Don't fucking bend over backwards trying to get all that shit sorted out day one. Bloody versus test, man. Just do it. Alright? Listen to me. But as far as like key principles and shit to remember while you're playing, and I will say this, I'm gonna go ahead and like we're gonna malign the only thing about the wheel. We're gonna malign the only thing about the wheel that I can think to malign, and the codex helps fix this. It does not tell you in as much detail as you may need, and God knows I needed it when I was playing. The game does not tell you in as much detail as I would like how to actually run the game. Right? Burning Wheel wants you to experience it. Doesn't want to tell you what to expect. The codex helps. The codex is all about that shit. But if you're just looking at the gold rules, like, sorry, Luke, it doesn't do a great job. But that's fine. So we're here for, right? We're here to fix that. Anyway, point being here, key principles, shit to remember while you're playing. The biggest things that Burning Wheel does that can be hard to wrap your head around, it's not all the little mechanical shit. It's not picking obs. It's not even like range and cover, honestly, because once you get that stuff figured out, once the mechanisms work for you in your head, you're fine. It's the GM stuff. It's the stuff like let it ride, roll dice or say yes, and the whole idea of failing forward. Because if you're coming from D&D or like, I don't know, Warhammer Fantasy or Rollmaster or Tunnels and Trolls or whatever, these are things that will really fuck you up. So Let It Ride is your pacemaker, right? If you're not familiar, Let It Ride, and if you've played Burning Wheel, you fucking better be familiar with Let It Ride. But Let It Ride is the thing that says you only roll for one thing once. Sneaking into the wizard's castle, fucking roll. Roll once. That's it. Go. Right? Want to fight someone with a sword? Do it, but you can't just roll again if you don't get what you want. It lets you say, we're rolling for this, and success or fail, we're moving on. We're not going to linger on this point. It's tied into failing forward in a really strong way. But the point here for Let It Ride is momentum, right? We've talked about this. Momentum is the lifeblood of Burning Wheel. Without momentum, you don't get growth. Without growth, the characters don't change. Without change, the game is dead. Your campaign is stillborn. So Let It Ride helps with that. And roll dice or say yes is similar, but there are some circumstances in which you, as the GM, want to just pass through the gates of failure and into the land of milk, honey, and successful rolls, because the roll itself is just boring and not interesting or irrelevant. The players ask, can I do this? This is my intent, and your task is nothing here. This rule is interesting because lots of people flip it around. I don't know where this came from. Check your copies of Dogs in the Vineyard, and I think that it's this way too, but explicitly in the Burning Wheel, it says roll dice or say yes, in that order for a reason. I can't tell you how many people misquote that as say yes or roll dice, which is the total opposite horseshit, don't do it approach to Burning Wheel. Burning Wheel is not about saying yes. Burning Wheel is about saying, oh yeah? Well, what about, right? So you can, if you're not interested in the, oh yeah, what about? If it's not related to anything important, you can just say, sure, don't bother with the resources test. You buy yourself some clothes, right? You have resources 5. Don't bother rolling. It's pointless. It's irrelevant. It's a way for you to pace things and to judge circumstances, but be careful. Because tests are very important to giving characters advancement in the game. Giving the PCs whatever they want without asking for a test doesn't help advancement, doesn't create opportunities for failure, it breaks the system, and the game comes to a grinding halt. And failing forward is about making every roll matter. It's a skill you'll build up over time, and to be totally honest, I didn't really, honestly really get fail forward until I played Mouse Guard. Mouse Guard has this incredibly beautiful flow chart system to it, where every time you roll, the GM has to make a decision about what happens. And the more I played Mouse Guard, the better I got at playing Burning Wheel, because I understood the idea of you failed, however, here's the next horrible thing. Here's the next bad thing you need to deal with. That game refined my failing forward like crazy. So you'll learn that. Just keep it in mind. If someone fails, don't say nothing happens. Don't say nothing seems to happen. Just do something interesting. Improvise, right? Reread those sections. Hit those ones up specifically because they're really helpful, and you're going to want to internalize them in the same way you would internalize the agenda and the principles and the moves of an Apocalypse Engine game. It's very important, those 3 things. They're as important or more important to running the game than just knowing how to pick obs and to do all that stuff, right? Hit your situation hard, so hard from the get-go. Burning Wheel is great on paper. It's a cool book to read. All kinds of useful rules, all kinds of great shit. But it sings at the table. When you get a group going, it really just, it's so good. Wheels turning, fires burning, beliefs are getting hit, Artha's getting owned, all that shit, get on it, because your group deserves that, and so do you. And you're going to fuck it up. I promise. I promise you're going to fuck it up. You're going to fuck it up a bunch. It's going to be a tragedy. But it's okay. Right? It'll be fine. And even strangers from Roll20, even randos on the internet, they haven't played much either, I assume, or maybe they'd be GMing, and you'll be okay. You'll get better. I promise. You'll be fine. You'll be better than fine. You're going to kick ass. So there you go. 3.5 questions about the Burning Wheel. My favorite tabletop RPG, brought to you by you asking me these questions. And if you want to get involved with Office Hours, because I didn't mention at the beginning, you can go and submit your own questions, and I hope you do, to www.adam-koble.com/office-hours. There's a form there you can fill out that will send me your questions. I will go through them. I will answer them. We will have a talk about it. It will be great. So definitely get on board with the Office Hours, and we should be back next week. It'll be our last pre-Gen Con edition of Office Hours, and then I'm off to beautiful Indianapolis. So tune in next week for that, and we will see you otherwise on the YouTubes. Thanks for coming, everybody. I hope this was an informative session, and if you're not already playing the Burning Wheel, I hope you give it a try, because it's fucking fun. See you next time.